Hello everybody, welcome back. Happy 2022. Happy Sunday. I hope you have been having a nice few days, a nice week. Today's video is very excitingly all about books. One of my big goals for 2021 was to read more, and I feel like this is a goal that is very common, that I have set myself very often, like year on year. And I feel like last year was the first time I actually followed through with it to some extent and actually read a decent amount of books. And I'm really proud of myself because I love buying books, I love having like a long TBR, but it's just the actual act of like getting into a book which I sometimes find difficult, and especially if I haven't read in a while, I find it hard to like find a book which gets me back into reading. So I thought today I would share with you some of my favourite books I've read. Most of these I read in the last year, and if your goal in 2022 is to read more, these are some books I would recommend to get you back into the reading groove. These are going to be books which I found quite page turning. I didn't find that I was forcing myself to read them, and I was just excited and really loved the stories. There's a decent amount of variety as well because obviously everybody likes different things. These are my 10 books that I would recommend to get you back into reading. Also, don't have too much imposter syndrome. I feel like this is what held me back for ages, was that I was like, oh, I'm just not really like a literature, English kind of gal, like maths and that sort of thing is probably what makes more sense to me. So I was always just like, oh, there's no point in me reading all these books, like I won't get it, I'm not smart enough. Like, firstly, just because you don't necessarily analyze a book to the level that like somebody else might, it doesn't mean that you're not taking stuff away from it. I personally think a good book will be able to have an impact on a reader of many different standards, I guess. Like, how good is a book if only like English students are able to like take something away from it? Not that good, right? Let's just get into it. So the first book I'm going to recommend is Norwegian Wood. This is the last book I read of 2021. I read this, I finished about like a week, 2 weeks ago, and this was on my list for so long. I've had like infinite number of people talk about this, and I also know so many people who have this as their favourite book, and I'm definitely going to recommend it to you. I found this to be extremely gripping. It's about a student living in Tokyo, and it's about kind of like love and just like student life. I love that it's set in Tokyo. You do get quite a cool insight into like the culture, which I really enjoyed as an aspect of this book. The protagonist is actually reflecting back on his time as a student, so it's quite like nostalgic, which I love. Nostalgia is like one of my favourite feelings, and you definitely, like, this book radiates that. So obviously the book is named after the Beatles song Norwegian Wood, and the protagonist hears the song and it makes him think back to his days as a student, and then you kind of get that story around it. I would say the reason this is so gripping is because the characters are just so almost complicated. I'd say this book is very character driven. I guess there's plot as well, but like I would say the character development is very, very intense. There's also themes of like mental health. Suicide is a huge theme in this book, so be careful if that's like something you don't want to read about. I'd definitely avoid this. I think the main reason I'd say this could get you back into reading is because this is not like anything I've really ever read. It's also was originally written in Japanese, so this is the translation. I would love to read the original Japanese version, but I just do not think I'll ever be fluent in Japanese. I really enjoyed this book, and it gave me like a new kind of, I've never read anything like it, which I love when I read a book that is quite unique. However, there is just one side note that I want to say about this book, and that is the way that women are written about is really unenjoyable. I haven't analysed it like too far or done much research. I don't know if that is intentional or if that is just how the author thinks. I think I have heard that that's like a theme within Murakami books, but I would be like wary of that. I think that cut for me personally did taint the book a little bit, but I'm still going to recommend it because I read this so quickly, and I like would definitely recommend it to a friend. Next up, I have two Sally Rooney books. First is Normal People, second is Conversation with Friends. I'm not gonna go on and on about these because probably a lot of people have read them already. Sally Rooney is again another author who is extremely character driven. These stories, these are barely even stories, it's just like character driven writing. And so Normal People follows Marianne and Connell, who are so it starts when they're in school and then they progress into like uni, and it ends with them like graduating. They grow up in Ireland and then they go to university in Dublin. In my head, I think that books with not much going on or less plot would be less gripping and page turning, but I actually found both of these to be extremely page turning, and I just love the style of her writing. Like, you really do stay for her writing. That is what carries these books, I think. There's some like really interesting ideas within these books. So I'd say Normal People and Conversations with Friends is are stories about love and relationships and friendship. I think I've said this before, but Sally Rooney gets like knocked sometimes for making books or writing books about topics which aren't necessarily like super deep or world changing, I guess. But I personally love that she writes about like more mundane and like simple storylines and love and relationships and things like that, because that at the end of the day is the stuff that most relatable. What I also love about them is that they are realistic. It's not just like a soppy love story where it ends with the couple, you know, getting married and having kids and stuff like that. So I like that about these books. And Conversations with Friends is students living in Dublin, and then they make friends with this like older couple, and it's kind of, yeah, a story about friendship and relationships, love, sex. And I think the main reason these books are good is just Sally Rooney. Like, her writing is just unbelievable. I have also read her other more recent book, which is Beautiful World, Where Are You? I'd also recommend that. I wouldn't put it as at the top. Like, if you haven't ever read Sally Rooney, I personally recommend these over that, but I do also really love that book. So, and I'd also recommend the BBC series of Normal People. I loved it. Next we have Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro, which is hands down my favourite book maybe ever. Okay, no, it's gonna be top 5. Like, this book is amazing. This is a dystopian novel, which dystopian writing is probably my favourite. I find that to be just like really gripping, really page turning. I don't really know how much to say, because the beauty of this book is that you're kind of thrown in at the deep end and no idea what this world is about, and it's really like amazingly written, reflected in like the protagonist is also kind of figuring out, you know, the systems in place in this world are. So yeah, I read this book extremely quickly, like in like 2-3 days. I think because the first like almost half of the book you honestly don't really know what's going on, and that's what made me want to keep reading, because I was like, okay, I need to figure it out, like where are all these pieces slotting together. That's definitely what kept me hooked. I will say, if you're only going to read like 10 pages a day, this will be a tougher read, because there's not too much instant gratification at the start of the book. Like, there's a lot of questions and you just need to keep going. So I would say if you find the start of this book a little bit of a challenge, like please push through, because this is like genuinely my favourite book. I bought this for my dad for Christmas because he was like, I want to read more, and I was like, you should read this, and he's read it already and he loved it as well. So I'll just read what it says on the back, because I don't really know how to sum this up without giving too much away. Narrated by Kathy, now 31, Never Let Me Go dramatises her attempts to come to terms with her childhood at the seemingly idyllic Hailsham school, and with the fate that has always awaited her and her closest friends in the wider world. A story of love, friendship and memory, Never Let Me Go is charged throughout with a sense of fragility of life. There's also a movie. I wouldn't say it's like the best movie I've ever seen at all, but I quite liked watching it. I definitely don't watch it before you read the book though. Okay, next up we have The Flat Share. This book is extremely easy to read, page turning and light-hearted. It's a lovely story, a lovely storyline. This fits more into the category of those books where it's like, you know, happy love story. I really loved the like kind of uniqueness of the storyline. So it's about two strangers who occupy the same flat. So one of them has it through the day and then one of them has it through the night, because they work night shifts, and one of them works day shifts, you know. Obviously you can kind of guess what happens, but I really liked just how simple this is. I love reading like books like this in between more serious emotional books. I find that reading like back to back like really hard hitting emotional stuff just does not sit well with me, and I find really good for my brain to like switch the pace up, and this is one of my favourite books of this genre. I read this I think in like the first lockdown. I remember it being just a really lovely like summer read for me. Staying in the same sort of genre, we have Ghosts by Dolly Alderton. I also really recommend her other book, which is Everything I Know About Love. I almost put that in this video, maybe I should, I don't know. Look it up, because that's also an amazing book. But this is her more recent fiction story. It's about a woman called Nayna. I think she's like in her early 30s. Again, it's just about like love, career, growing up. I think it's a lot about, you know, comparing yourself to others and seeing your friends and comparing your lifestyle to theirs, and you know, maybe feeling like you're behind in life. I think it does a good job of kind of making you feel like it's okay to just be wherever you're at is like where you're meant to be. I also really love that it is a love story and it's about like a couple and a relationship, but that isn't the focus of the book, which I find sometimes kind of frustrating when a lot of storylines have the kind of, oh, girl meets boy and then her like whole life is perfect and happy because now she has a boyfriend and that's like the goal in life. And like this book isn't like that, which is much better. And I feel like a lot more realistic. So yeah, it's called Ghosts because she ends up getting ghosted, kind of what it's about. It's also about like family and just her like relationships in life, set in London. Another easier like page turning book to recommend. Okay, the next book I am going to recommend I don't actually have with me, sadly. It's in Edinburgh, but it is The Midnight Library by Matthaig. This was a long-awaited book for me. I've heard so many good things about it. I think this might actually be my top recommendation from this video because it is the perfect balance of like something new and different. It's not just a classic love story, but it is also gripping and page turning. I do think it's good if you haven't read a book in a while. Like, it's one of those that will really like get you back into reading. So the story starts with the protagonist Nora taking her own life, and then she kind of wakes up in this library and there's a librarian, and all of the books are different lives that she could have taken, I guess, life paths. So, you know, what if I never dated that person? What if I'd moved to Australia? What if I'd done this? And then you get to kind of see all her different lives that she could have lived. That alone is like interesting, but I really just love the overarching message of the book. And like the ending I also find to be really nice. One of those books where you close the last page and you're like, oh, life's good, you know? Like, life is good. So I really recommend that for that, especially if you're looking for something a bit more uplifting. Obviously it does feature like mental health and like suicide issues and stuff like that, but I'd say that overall it's like a uplifting book. Next I have This Is Going to Hurt by Adam K. This book is very different to most of the other recommendations. This is what it's described as the secret diaries of a junior doctor. So he has like these little encounters and like stories that he's written about just his experience as a junior doctor, and you'd think like, okay, like I could read like an article about that, but I don't want to read like 300 pages on that. But this is actually extremely funny. He is like a comedian, so it's written really, really well. It is like just kind of hilarious. Like, I actually really loved this book, which is interesting because it's not like anything else I've really ever read. Another one of my lockdown 1 reads. It's described as hilarious, horrifying and heartbreaking. This is everything you wanted to know and more than a few things you didn't, about life on and off the hospital ward. I don't really know how else to describe it other than that, but you have to just take my word for it with this one. This is a really, really good book. Second to last, we have 1,000 Splendid Suns. This is another book which is in my running for top 3, top 5 books I've ever read. This book is very heartbreaking and sad, so if that's not what you're looking for, I wouldn't recommend it. However, I do think because of just the incredible story and how emotionally invested you become, I would recommend it as a book to get you back into reading, because it played on my emotions so much that like I just had to keep reading it. Yeah, this is a reasonably painful book though, so beware of that. So it's set in Afghanistan and it follows first one follows like a young girl and basically just her experience being a woman I think it starts in like the 60s, and it covers a huge time range. So the girl at the beginning is 15, and then I think the end of the book is like over 20 years later, maybe even like 40 years later. So you get to sort of like see the way she's treated, the way her life progresses, and I think what's most painful about it is that like the ending isn't just like happy, but I think that sends a more like powerful message, I guess, so it's definitely worth that. I also think the author has amazing storytelling skills. Like, the storytelling in this book is one of the things I think that keeps you reading. It's just like really, it's just genuinely so sad. My mum recommended me all of his books and she wasn't wrong. This is like probably my favourite book ever. I think no book I've read has made me feel like as intensely as this has. Mariam is only 15 when she is sent to Kabul to marry Rashid. Nearly 2 decades later, a friendship grows between Mariam and a local teenager, Layla, as strong as the ties between mother and daughter. When the Taliban take over, life becomes a desperate struggle against starvation, brutality and fear. Yet love can move people to act in unexpected ways and lead them to overcome the most daunting obstacles with startling heroism. And I believe the final book is Such a Fun Age, which I did leave in Edinburgh again, sorry. So Such a Fun Age follows a girl who is in like her mid-20s, and the book starts with her being mistreated because of her race, and then as the story continues you see like more aspects of her life, so you get to see kind of like her relationships, her friendships, her work, career. I think this book again is about like being in your 20s, not really sure what you want to do, like, you know, what career do I want, like who do I want to date, like, you know, what kind of friends do I want to have. But it also has that added aspect of like looking at things like microaggressions, racism, fetishes, privilege, and it's worked really well into the fictional story, which I really enjoyed. So I definitely recommend. Those are my 10 recommendations. Please let me know if you read any of them, and also if you have any more recommendations, comment down below, because obviously I haven't read that many books, so then we can all just like collate our recommendations together. I do have a Storygraph account where I have like all the books that I've read and my ratings of them. So if you want to follow that, the account is just Nayna, I believe. Hopefully this video was helpful, and happy reading, I guess. Have a nice week, and I'll see you next Sunday. Bye!